Good evening and welcome to League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson. 27 days until Election Day, and our ballot in Boone County is, from top to bottom, is full of interesting races and issues. My guest tonight is Rudy Keller, political reporter with the Columbia Daily Tribune. And Rudy's been watching a lot of these races in the last few months, and especially so since the primary in August. Rudy, what's the most interesting races you see on the ballot?
Well, good evening, Jim. And what I think is the most interesting two races are the United States Senate race and the state Senate race locally. We have in the United States Senate race, you have two candidates who seem to be falling over themselves sometimes, trying to mess up their own campaigns.
You're talking about Claire McCaskill and Todd Akin.
Claire McCaskill and Todd Akin, with Todd Akin's infamous now remark about legitimate rape that has made this race gotten a national profile that it didn't want. And Claire McCaskill, who seemed to be damaged goods coming out of the primary, with Todd Akin leading her in the polls because of her ties to Obama and some of the issues that have been raised about her own personal financial problems. And then the state Senate race pits Senator Kurt Schaefer against Democratic State Representative Mary Still. And what is interesting about this is that Senator Schaefer, in a Democratic year 4 years ago, won a 2% victory. And he's trying to become the first Republican ever to represent Boone County in the state Senate for 2 consecutive terms. So we have very eager candidates on both sides of both of those races trying to find their voters.
What does the latest polling on the U.S. Senate race show us?
Well, the latest polling on the U.S. Senate race shows that Akin is about 6 to 9 points behind Senator McCaskill. But what we've learned in the last few days is that Senator McCaskill raised about $6 million in the third quarter of the year, whereas Representative Akin seems to have only raised about $1 million, and the national Republican groups have cut him off from other sources of funding. So it's going to be very difficult for him to have a competitive media buy in the last weeks of the campaign, although he seemingly has found a good issue with a recent AP report that Senator McCaskill's family has received $40 million from federal rental subsidies to the people that they rent apartments to in their low-income housing. So without Representative Akin's legitimate rape remark, that might have been a final blow for Senator McCaskill, but it just seems like the things that are piling up against Akin are more than those that are piling up against Senator McCaskill.
You don't think he's recovered yet from the legitimate rape?
I don't think he has recovered yet. I think that it needs some sort of a game changer kind of event, much like what he caused when he said in a St. Louis television interview that women's bodies reject the pregnancies in rape, and then he went on to say that women who are raped and become pregnant should not be able to get a legal abortion. And I think that's the issue that has been the most caused him the most consternation, because most people don't view abortion in a case of rape to be particularly wrong.
How important is the money down the stretch in that race?
It's going to be immensely important. It would have had a much larger importance, but it's more the imbalance of the money in that race, where Senator McCaskill not only has her own large war chest that was built up before the primary, but also the national groups that are like Emily's List and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee that are coming in and assisting her to make sure that she does defeat Todd Akin, because it's a contest that was viewed as critical to the balance of power in the United States Senate.
So it's a well-watched race nationally.
Right.
Moving to the 19th Senate District in Missouri, what issues are dividing Senator Schaefer and Representative Still?
Well, just about every issue divides Senator Schaefer and Senator Still and Representative Still in some of the basic things that they've done. Representative Still votes against appropriations for the University of Missouri because they aren't big enough. And Senator Schaefer tries to portray himself as a Senate Appropriations Chair as doing the most he can in the circumstances that they're given. Representative Still supported tried to get the legislature to put a tobacco tax on the ballot, which, though Senator Schaefer is supporting it, he was not willing to sponsor that legislation himself and try to get it passed through the Senate. It's really an issue of style. Senator Schaefer wants to be viewed as a competent, get things done kind of senator, and Representative Still wants to portray herself as someone who will go up and get in the way of what she views as the worst aspects of the Tea Party philosophy evident in the Republican Party.
Well, there's a big GOP majority in the House, so that's kind of what she's relegated to in the House, is that not
right?
correct?
In the House of Representatives, it's very difficult for Democrats to get bills passed, but it's not impossible. Under Steve Tilley, the Speaker, Representative Chris Kelly from our area has gotten some bills passed, and even was made a committee chairman. But that was based on Chris's willingness to work with the Republicans to get their bills passed, as opposed to Representative Still, who seems to want to oppose them on most issues.
And Chris Kelly, by the way, is unopposed in the 45th House District. Let's move on to some other state races. The governor, Jay Nixon versus Dave Spence, really.
Well, Governor Nixon is playing a very cautious strategy in the race for governor. He's not debating Dave Spence in any forum that's on television, and he is using all of the mechanics of his office to generate publicity. He's continuing to go do various events that are announced through his official office, but Dave Spence is feeling the heat because he was on the board of a bank that took a large loan from the federal government in the bailout that has not been paid back. And it's difficult for him to explain that he was on the board of directors and wasn't really running the bank. There's a lot of people who are just angry over the bailout, and that's all they hear. So that becomes an issue that is working against him.
And what's polling showing in that race?
Polling is showing that the governor is well ahead. I would hesitate to say what the recent polls are. I haven't looked at them in a few days, so I wouldn't put a number on it. But the governor seems to be well ahead in that race. Yes. Though Dave Spence did get about $900,000 from the Republican Governors Association, which seems ready to spend about $3 million additional on his behalf. So it could change.
So the money will have an impact in that race too.
Money has an impact in every race. Yeah. I mentioned the state Senate race. Senator Schaefer has about 4 times as much money as of September 1st as Representative Still has. And so his ads are going to be everywhere, where she's going to have to be very selective and effective with what she does with her money.
Lieutenant governor is an interesting race. Susan Montee, who is a former state auditor, has some statewide name recognition, versus Peter Kinder, who had some problems in the last couple of years that persuaded him not to run for governor.
Right. Peter Kinder had some personal issues that came up last year involving his acquaintance with a stripper, if would probably be a mild way to put it, and he had some other things that came up. Susan Montee lost a statewide race in 2010, seeking re-election as state auditor, and she essentially in the spring said she got into this race because she didn't see that there was an effective Democratic candidate who was willing to step up, and by the time others who had some name recognition had stepped up, she was committed to the race. So it'll be quite interesting whether Peter Kinder's 12 years in office, or 8 years in office looking for a third term, can overcome her name recognition. That one thing that Peter Kinder has going for him is he's well liked in St. Louis, especially among some St. Louis Democrats. So that could have play a factor in his reelection that is not there for other Republican candidates.
Now, did Susan Montee have an expensive primary?
No, she did not have an expensive primary. Unlike Lieutenant Governor Kinder, Lieutenant Governor Kinder was forced to spend all the money he had raised in anticipation of running for governor to fight off Senator Brad Lauger.
Right.
And Susan Montee, I think, raised about $100,000 and spent very little of it, banking on that name recognition she had built up to carry her through the primary, and that worked for her. So,
is there any polling in that race?
Not that I've seen.
Yeah.
Not that I've seen.
What about the funding advantage? Is there?
We're waiting for campaign finance reports that tell us what's happened in the month of September. Neither candidate had raised a lot of money in August after the primary. There's been some indication that a few of the donors who had abandoned Peter Kinder may be coming back to him in some of the large donation reports, but neither one is setting the world on fire raising money.
Mm-hmm. Now the Secretary of State, that's an important office, an open office. Robin Carnahan decided not to run again. Jason Kinder, the Democrat against Shane Scholler, who is a conservative Republican.
Yeah.
Former state rep.
No, Shane Scholler is currently a state rep. He's the Speaker pro tem of the Missouri House, but so Jason Kinder is also a state representative. So these people are probably not very well known outside their home areas. And I expect that this race will have a whole lot to do with how well people above them in their own parties are doing on the ballot. Representative Scholler thinks that he has a winning issue in voter identification, requiring everyone who wants to vote to take a government-issued photo ID with them to the polls. That was going to be on the ballot with him as a constitutional amendment, but it got struck down by the courts when the ballot title couldn't be rewritten in time to meet the deadlines.
So that works against him?
That works against him.
Are they both running strong campaigns? Or?
They're running the best campaign they can, and Representative Scholler had a three-way primary, and he was forced to spend his money to win the Republican primary. Representative Kinder did not have a primary, so he was able to bank his money. So I think that the advantage, at least in funding, at the beginning of the fall campaign was with Jason Kinder. But still, I think it's an issue of who's turning out on election day and who's winning at the top of the ballot.
Mm-hmm. And for Attorney General is another interesting race. Chris Koster, the incumbent, against Ed Martin.
Well, this is probably, aside from the Senate race and the governor's race, this is probably the most interesting race, down ballot statewide race, because Chris Koster is portraying himself as the tough prosecutor that he was in Cass County, where he's from. But he's also been hung with the title Obama's lawyer by Ed Martin, the former chief of staff to Governor Matt Blunt. And the reason that Ed Martin thinks that that's an effective strategy is because he thinks that the federal health care reform is very unpopular in Missouri. And many states challenged that federal health care reform, but Attorney General Koster did not get into that fight in full force or right away after it was passed. Now, Koster being a Democrat, I would imagine that he would tell you that there are a lot more important things for the Attorney General of Missouri to be doing than challenging in court everything that the federal government is doing. But Ed Martin says that's going to be his number one priority on the day he gets sworn in. He's going to open up a section in his office specifically aimed at fighting every federal thing he opposes.
And will that resonate with Missouri voters?
Well, Missouri voters have always been a little bit skeptical of federal authority.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's going to be effective this year. I think, once again, we have a race that is dependent on how people are doing above them on the ballot. By the time you get to that race, though it probably will be one that you'll see the most difference from the general trend line. So if Ed Martin has found an effective strategy And another thing that he's attacking Koster on is Koster's claims for prosecutions, where Koster is using the prosecutions where he's assigned assistant attorney generals to cases and saying that that makes him the prosecutor in those cases. Now,
Prosecutor of record.
yes. So I don't know if Missouri voters care whether their attorney general is prosecuting people, because that's really not his job. The attorney general is supposed to defend the state in court. They're supposed to defend state agencies against lawsuits, and he's supposed to work at the discretion and direction of the agencies he works for. He's supposed to defend the laws passed by the General Assembly on the assumption that they're constitutional. It's not his job to tell the General Assembly this was an unconstitutional law and therefore I won't defend it. He has, and I haven't heard a lot of complaints about Koster from the Democratic side of the aisle in the General Assembly, though they probably wish he was a little more visible.
Right. And Chris Koster was actually a Republican state senator, right?
Right.
And ran for attorney general as a Democrat.
And that could be why the vehemence against him from the Republican side is so strong. They were upset with him because they thought they had an attractive candidate potentially for statewide office, and he switched to the Democratic Party in 2008, and Democrats swept into all the statewide offices that year, except for lieutenant governors. So it was an effective move on his part, but he's never been overtly partisan cheerleader for either party, which Missourians tend to not like people who become the number one cheerleader for their party. They like to see that someone has a little bit of that Harry Truman independence in them, and a streak of I'm going to kind of thumb your nose and I'm going to go my own way kind of attitude. That's what Missourians are most appreciative of.
Let's move on to the 4th District. With the reapportionment, decennial reapportionment, we've got a brand new congressional district.
Right. We now run from, the 4th Congressional District now runs from Audrain County to the Kansas border, and it takes in Boone County for the first time. It seems like every time that the state loses a congressional district, Boone County gets shifted to another congressional district, and because nobody seems to like our voters.
And both candidates are from western part of the state.
Both candidates are actually from Cass County. And Teresa Hensley is the prosecuting attorney for Cass County, who was elected to replace Chris Koster.
And she's a Democrat.
And she's a Democrat. Vicki Hartzler defeated veteran Congressman Ike Skelton 2 years ago in the Tea Party wave, and she is and she's a former state representative and a former teacher. It doesn't seem to hurt her with her constituencies that she's very much in the Tea Party mold. She voted against every effort to raise the debt ceiling, even the bill that was passed in order to keep the federal government alive last year.
But the district looks different this time around.
The district looks dramatically different. Boone County is a much more Democratic-leaning area, and it potentially could create some problems for Hartzler if Hensley's campaign can capture the imagination of voters. But it's with less than a month to go, it seems as though there's not a lot going on there.
I think that especially Vicki Hartzler has said her polling shows her in front. I guess that's predictable, huh?
Yeah, she's released 2 memos on her polls, and the thing that seems to please them the most, more than even her lead in those polls, is the low name recognition that Hensley has achieved in several months of campaigning. It doesn't seem like Hensley is breaking through where voters even know who she is, which is the first step to winning a campaign.
And that depends on funding,
Well,
campaign finance.
Ms. Hensley generated about $350,000 in the first quarter of the year. It seemed like her fundraising was exceptional at that point. It has not been so good since then, and her and she's not on the air right now with television ads, so it makes it very difficult.
And her opponent is.
And her opponent is. So,
well, some local House races are interesting. Ken Jacob, a veteran Democrat, against Caleb Rowden, an upstart Republican.
yeah, that is, Ken Jacob seems to be following his old classmate from 1982, Chris Kelly. They were both first elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in 1982. And Chris Kelly made a comeback to the legislature because he did not have term limits that had come into effect on him, but Ken Jacob had those term limits prevent him from being reelected to the state Senate.
Right.
But Jacob has 8 years available to him under the Constitution to be a member of the House of Representatives, though he has 14 years there in his past. So he's got the experience, and Caleb Rowden is a very energetic young musician turned businessman who is trying very hard to stay in this race. It's an interesting dynamic because it's an area that Ken Jacobs run for state senate in, but it's a more rural area than he ever ran for state representative.
Yeah, it's a new 44th district.
Yeah.
And then that reapportionment may have changed the voting pattern.
Yeah, our districts were all renumbered in Boone County. We now have the 44th, 45th, 46th, 47th, and 50th districts. The 45th and the 46th district are completely within the city limits of Columbia. The 47th district is the area of northwest Boone County, Cooper County, parts of Cooper County and Howard County, and Randolph County. The 44th district is northeast, that's Centralia, Hallsville area. And the 50th is basically southern Boone County, crossing the river and including much of Montauk County. And,
right.
So we have two contested races, or two uncontested candidates, Chris Kelly in the 45th, as you mentioned, and Caleb Jones in the 50th.
And they took I know Chris took pains to choose which district so he would not oppose Caleb Jones.
Right, because Chris has been effective working with Republicans, and if he took out a Republican who is viewed as a well-liked in the party, uprising star, and he defeated him in a race, that would make it much more difficult for Chris to keep his friends in the General Assembly on the Republican side.
Well, we're about to wind down time here, so let's hit these and move on. District 46, Stephen Weber versus Fred Berry.
Yeah, Mr. Berry is making a valiant attempt to take a district that has not gone Republican in my memory or time in Boone County. He thinks that a Tea Party campaign. He embraced Todd Akin immediately upon Todd Akin making the statements that so damaged his campaign, and he's running against incumbent Stephen Weber, who is a law student and an Iraq War veteran, and it has raised a considerable amount more money, but it's just
gained some respect in the House.
Yeah, Stephen Weber has quite a bit of has worked very closely with Senator Schaefer and others, Representative Jones, who we mentioned a minute ago, on some of the issues involved in facing Boone County.
Two newcomers in 47, John Wright and Mitch Richards.
Now that one is a very unbalanced race financially. John Wright has amassed a considerable amount of wealth as a venture capitalist, and came back home to Boone County, where he was from, to settle and to run for office. And Mitch Richards is a libertarian turned Republican who is fighting very hard on issues of personal freedom and other issues, trying to generate the Republican votes in the rural parts of the district that he's going to need in order to win.
Has Mitch Richards been able to raise the money to be competitive in that race?
I don't know if you could even consider the abilities of him to raise a few tens of thousands of dollars competitive against John Wright, who has put in $200,000 of his own money into the race. But what could happen in that race, if polling data shows it's possible, is a large surge of late money from the Republicans, who are well funded at the statewide level and could easily spend $200,000 in that race in the last 10 days if they think it's possible to beat John Wright.
Okay. A lightning round here on the
Okay.
on the constitutional amendment number 3. That's the court's plan.
Oh, the court's plan is minor changes to the way judges are selected in the state of Missouri, and even the one-time supporters of this proposal have abandoned it because it doesn't go far enough, in their opinion, to reform how courts or judges are chosen. They would prefer a direct election of Supreme Court judges, but I'm not sure Missourians are ready for something like that.
Proposition B is the tobacco tax, very important for Columbia.
It's been defeated twice in the past decade. This is a 73-cent per pack tax on cigarettes that would be divided among public schools. It would be higher education and tobacco cessation. So 20% of the money that comes in from this is going to be aimed at stopping people from paying the tax. I don't know if that's the best way to fund government, but it should get a lot of money right away, which has been what the university and other schools have been begging for.
Yep. And Proposition E has to do with insurance exchanges, Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, this is a anti-Obamacare initiative that Republicans are hoping will bring people to the polls, but we haven't seen any kind of a campaign on it like we did a few years ago for the one we voted on in August that said you couldn't force Missourians to buy health insurance.
Right.
This is one that would keep us from having an online ability to buy health insurance and compare prices.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're out of time, Rudy. That's very interesting, and we did not hit everything on the ballot, but I think we hit some interesting points and candidates and issues, and we'll be watching your coverage.
All right, well, if people can go to our website at the Tribune, they can find election coverage.
That's columbiatribune.com. So thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you found something to take with you, and we'll come back next month. I'm Jim Robertson. Good night.